So let's take a look at typologies and religious organisations. There's a lot here to cover. So in order to understand religion, one of the things that was introduced by Weber in the 1900s was he brought in this idea of ideal types. And it's basically perfect examples of religions. He tried to do is to organise the variety of religions that existed in society. Now, with all ideal types, we have church, denomination, sect, cult. These are some of the original typologies we'll look at. It's helpful for organising religion, but just keeping in mind that not every religion fits neatly into these typologies, and as society developed, religion changed, new typologies were developed to accommodate the vast variety of religions. So Weber introduced the first ideal type. The first part of this was a church, and he said the church was large, it had a clear structure, and that's the big thing about Weber's typology. He was looking at the structure. So for the church, it was large, it was organised, it had a predominantly middle class clientele. It was very positive and tolerant of wider society, and big examples would be the Catholic Church, it would be Islam, Judaism, all these different mainstream, large established religions. Now, following on from Weber, we saw Troeltsch. Now, Troeltsch came along in 1912 and he introduced the category of sect, and he kind of used this as the opposite of the church. These were smaller organisations, smaller structure. They were quite small. And ultimately there was no connection or hierarchy. There was always a charismatic leader. They had very high, strong commitments. They were hostile to the outside world, and they claimed a monopoly of truth. Basically, the idea being that their version of religion was the main and only accepted one. Very similar to the church, who also claimed a monopoly of the truth. And often it would appeal to marginalised groups. So People's Temple, Heaven's Gate, Westboro Baptist Church, all good examples. Now, Troeltsch inadvertently also introduced the category of cult. He called it mysticism, but he used mysticism to describe smaller groups that weren't a church. There was no structure, they were loose-knit, no hierarchy, they were tolerant in the outside world, and often membership was part-time. And this would cover stuff like meditation, Reiki, yoga, crystal healing. It was later referred to and changed the name to cult by Bruce, who we're going to see later, but ultimately he introduced that concept. And then in 1925, Niebuhr came along and he added in the final element of this traditional typology. And these were the denominations. So these were somewhere in the middle between a church and a sect. So bigger than a sect, but not quite a church. They had bureaucracy, no connection to the state, limited requirements, but maybe slightly more expectation than a church. They were tolerant of other religions, no monopoly of the truth. And this would be stuff like Pentecostal churches, Methodists, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, Scientology is an interesting one here because it doesn't quite fit neatly into any category. If you imagine, it's got very high commitment in some respects, which would put it in the sect, but it's all about spiritual and self-development, which kind of puts it into the cult. But also it's quite bureaucratic, it's quite wealthy, and it does exist and is tolerant of other religions. So it doesn't fit neatly, as I said, into this ideal type, but we will see Scientology again in a. So the next typology we have is Wallace. Wallace came along in 1984 and he changed things up a little bit. So he got rid of looking at the church. He saw secularization as a growing process, so dropped the church from the categories. He also looked at the remaining categories, denomination, sect, cult, and rather than carry on with those, he adapted them. So he got rid of the idea of structure. He didn't look at the structure of the religion. He focused on its relationship to the world around it. So he focused on their worldview, and he introduced world accommodating, world rejecting, and world affirming. But they are essentially still denomination, sect, cult with a different name. So the same characteristics carry over as we previously saw. The difference being that the world accommodating, they don't accept or reject the outside world. They exist alongside it, and they focus on their own spiritual experience. So the Methodists, again, would come under this category. The world rejecting, as always, hostile to the outside world. So strong commitment and often appeal to the marginalised. So before, People's Temple, Heaven's Gate, Westboro Baptist Church would count as world rejecting. And lastly, we had the world affirming. Now, these are very tolerant of the outside world. And again, mediation, Reiki, yoga, crystal healing, all would be the same examples. Now, Scientology again pops up here, and I wanted to highlight this as part. It could fit into world affirming because it gets along with the outside world. And again, it's about self-fulfillment, self-development. And the last category we have is Bruce. Now, Bruce introduced the NAMs, so New Age movements. And again, as with Wallace, he changed things up. So he didn't worry about church, he didn't worry about denomination, he didn't worry about sect. He didn't focus on any of the other religious types. He focused solely on what were cults or world affirming in previous versions. And he wanted to identify the variety of cults as a new typology. So he focused on new science, new ecology, and new psychology, spirituality. Now, new science is all about new scientific thinking. It has two branches. You've got the practice of old healing, or new old medicine, so homeopathy, herbalism. You've also got focus on the otherworldly, so scientific evidence to study the otherworldly, so supernatural phenomena and alien abductions. New ecology is all about the environment, so it sees the earth as sacred and will cover stuff like veganism, recycling, Wicca, and Gaia. And then new psychology, new spirituality, again has different elements and different branches, but it's about spiritual growth and self-improvement. So it might be yoga, or meditation would have this self-improvement, but it also has branches of supernatural connections. It's not like investigations with the new science, but it's about the connection. So tarot readings, spiritual mediums, and connections to the paranormal in that way. And there we have our three typologies: the traditional, the new religious movement, and the new age.